All right, thanks for signing up today, Joya. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Marcus. And I'm so glad to see so many of you today. Thank you for showing up. Um, this is a topic that I've been thinking about for a very long time. I'm not an expert in public policy, but I have a big interest in it because from where I come from, Mauritius, actually, I was involved in one of the, I think, one of the pioneering um, plans on green growth for Mauritius. So we did that very early on, which was like in 2000 and it all started in 2008, 2009. So I was part of that and I found that process was very unique and very different from what you would think about a policy. There was a lot of stakeholder participation. There was a lot of input from the civil society. um, there was this huge plan about green growth, sorry, in different sectors. So different, stakeholders from those sectors were involved. So it was a really interesting one because at the end of it, when it had to be implemented, um, we used to, go out to the different districts or towns, and we used to tell people, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. So that was also part of the process to come up with the policies. So at the end of it, when implementation had started, um, th there were, when you would just talk to people, in those communities, they were actually like, yes, we know about that program. I mean, we understand that, that policy, or oh, we were part of this discussion while this group was there. So that was really, something that I thought that was okay. Well, that's great, and everything was good. But then, unfortunately, we couldn't see what the end result was because, the government changed and all of that, and they shut down that program. But yeah, so this is why I wanted to bring up this topic because it was such great work, uh, and it just didn't go anywhere. Although it could have done some great things. So anyway, so what I want to do is if the agenda is okay with everyone, we can just start off with just talking about, each one of you can talk about what you think about policy development. And as I said, is it good, bad, or ugly? Or share your insights if you've worked in that space. I'd just love to hear what your thoughts are about the development of public policy.
As it
So,
now exists or through a regenerative lens?
no, as it now exists.
Okay.
As it now exists, yeah. What is, yeah, is it good, bad, or really bad, or ugly? So I'd like to hear, yeah. So just jump in, that's fine. Thank you so much.
Joyak, before we start off, could I ask us, when public policy is pretty broad, so what could you sort of be more specific about the sort of policies you're thinking have in mind here? I mean, are they national policies? Are they regional policies, local policies? Are they, as you've indicated, around Mauritius? Are they around environmental issues, or are they around financial issues or economic? So yeah, if it'd be helpful just to have a to sort of define a little bit what you're looking to explore.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a good question. I mean, I have worked in the environmental policy sector, but I don't want to restrict that just to that sector. I feel public policy, um, as a whole, as a process, what is currently the process that governments are taking to come up with these policies, and then what is happening not only during the development, but also during the implementation. And then if that comes to an end, what is happening throughout that process. So it could be any sector. I would love to stick to environment because that's what I do, but really any sector about having to, because for me, I think public policies are there just to solve a problem. they're always solving a problem. So what, it could be any problem.
So
But yeah.
yeah, another question to follow up on, Tony. So in addition to the sector, and I was thinking about the legal framework tied to the place where this is, because policies go through a development process, they go through a public comment process, and then they go through an implementation process, which requires government action at different levels. So you could have local, you could have chamber, Senate, House, whatever, depending on the level and type of policy it is, and then final approval. And then once it's approved, then you go through implementation. So were you looking for a place-based thoughts or general policy? So the development, the engagement, or the implementation, what were your more systematically, what part of that living system were you thinking about?
I don't know, actually, Miguel. This is what I think this is why I wanted to have this session, because yes, I'm thinking it's about the development side that I wanted to look at that as the living system, but I want so I think I'm thinking that the way to approach this would be basically to maybe look at what the challenges are today of the policy making process, if there are any. I think for maybe the developing countries also, maybe I don't know if I'm being too specific, but maybe for developing countries, what would be the but yeah, I just want us to just share and think about this maybe I'm being too broad saying process, maybe it should just be the development, but then we want the policy to be effective, so we have to think about all those stages, which is quite a lot. So yeah, Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, not to be overly simplistic, but what comes up for me is that there are two ways that policies are developed. One is somewhat of a grassroots or a nonprofit area where a neighborhood or an organization sees an opportunity to solve a problem or increase capacity, or could come from either direction, and present very, very well written policies to their representatives, who can then adopt them as their own and evolve them to what might be politically possible. And the other part, which may actually, I suspect, is having a greater impact, is the ones that are coming out of corporations or corporate associations, where the oil and gas industry are writing policies and have the manpower and the depth and the money to put together great policies and to lobby for them. And so often these are then again going to the same representatives who decide to embrace them for because they believe them, or because they know there's potential money behind them to elongate their political careers. And I think those processes are really quite different. They end up in the same laps of legislators or councilmen, but certainly they're also being funded at very different levels. So their success is affected more by the funding than the greater good, or their ability to look at whole systems, as opposed to trying to change something just enough so that the people who brought it up can make some more money. Those are two, I say it very simplistic, but those are two very different processes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
whoever's
so
next.
I think I'm it's very broad for me, so I'm not really sure. And I think maybe I have more of a clarifying question, because I'm looking at all the frameworks, right? So and you go from, you know, from the monad all the way up to 12 point. And I just wonder, have you been working on, when you have been working on some of this, or are there at what level do you decide what framework to potentially work with? I mean, what is the policy trying to serve? And then is there a way to detect what framework to then start to get you going through and start to work on, what is going on here? What needs to be served? What needs to be addressed? What needs to be the outcome? How complex of a situation how far up in the points do we need to go? And I just wonder if you've had any thoughts around that, because this is very broad in terms of me sinking my teeth into it a little bit more. So just first off, just wanted to understand a little bit more if you've already done some thinking on this, or have applied some of these and felt that this was not, I need to have a different framework or something like that.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Aileen. I think that what I'm getting from maybe what I'm understanding and taking away from what you're saying is that um, I think it's the fundamental question about when does a policy get made or get approved, when that policy, that question about that, oh, we need a policy on this, it comes up when there's a problem, and when there's a problem and you have to solve that problem, and then you come up with a policy which solves it. It's like, for example, okay, you were in the shop, you did this, and now you're going to be punished, so this is what's going to happen to you. But maybe for to talk about regenerative focus and lens into this is maybe to just look at that particular thing that you're coming up with a policy because you think, not you think, but you're coming up with a policy most of the time because there's a problem. But what about coming up with a policy that is more for the sector, that actually can be more integrated with other sectors and understand that connectedness between these different components. It's not just looking at that one thing, that problem, but looking at it maybe on a bigger scale, and yeah, this is what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Um,
I think you're right, though. Yeah, I don't want to make it too broad.
so taking a step back on why policy exists to begin with. So there is an issue that you identify that requires some management. So it could be you want more of this, less of this, or all that. So it's a form of course correction within any given living system. So within a sector, you see that there's something that you want to steward in one way or the other, and based upon that symptom, then you step in and you traditionally determine a series of indicators that you can use to move from the current status to interim end state that you can then measure or quantify or qualify as you move forward. And the challenge there is that if you're looking at direct action, then you move the ship away from into a different path, but that path has another series of challenges and implications. So, like the one-child policy in China, for example. So they have a population issue, and then they take a course correction, and that course correction causes unintended consequences, and then you have to address those unintended consequences, and they continue to ripple out, and at some point you have harmonic ripples hitting into each other, and it's chaos. So if we take a step back and let's starting with the law of three, seeing what the current system is, what it is that you are seeing as the outcome, and then look at how that system is coming into being. So how, again, not looking at the symptoms, but looking at what within that system is in a way allowing for that condition to exist. And then looking at the greater whole where that system lives, then you can see where the greater whole is looking to be actualized within that system that you're looking at, and then dive into ways in which that policy could support that versus trying to take direct action.
Yeah, so go ahead, Jody, and then I'll.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're Miguel, I think that's part of what I wanted to share. I've got two quick stories. One is in New York State government, and the New York State climate law was developed by a lot of policy wonks that had no understanding of the sectors they were impacting, but they set goals and they did the bare minimum with good intent. They did the bare minimum of reaching out to find out the data points that they could then say that we have to reduce these by 2050. I think that that is how policy tends to work when it's instigated from the government in charge. What I think the bigger problem is related to that is a cultural feeling that that government is supposed to tell us what to do, despite the fact that we have so many systems in play at all times that government can't possibly know anything beyond their system. So that's one problem. A lot of architects, and that's what I am as an architect, sat around saying, we're not going to change anything because they haven't told us what to do yet. They've just told us the goals. And I'm like, why would you possibly want an elected official who has no knowledge of the building environment to tell you what you have to do as an architect? That's inaccurate. The policy should be set, and then the people who are implementing it should be informing the implementation path to reach the goals. So that's one story. The other story relates to what somebody else said about tying to different systems. And I think it's an indicator to me that our political realm needs to change, because we did a study when I was volunteering with ASHRAE. We did a study on the human health care avoidance benefits in electrifying 1 year of single and multifamily typical new construction in New York State. We said, if we're going to build one, whatever's normal for a year to be built new in New York State, single family and multifamily, if that were built all electric, and then we took the healthcare cost avoidance benefits and aggregated those over 25 years, assuming that there's impact in a family for 25 years. It ends up being $1.8 billion of avoided healthcare costs in New York State alone for New York State residents, typically residents in disenfranchised communities. And yet there is no ability to talk about policies that cross the divide between societal benefits, institutional benefits in healthcare, and then the cost investment that has to happen in another sector, such as the the homeowners construction industry. Nobody, there is, every single politician either represents healthcare, or they represent home builders, or they represent somebody else. So they can't have conversations.
Mm,
They can, they just don't think they can, actually, is my point.
yeah, thanks for that, Jody.
I would pick up on a couple of things. I think that Josh made a useful distinction with policies that are driven from the grassroots level up, and very different policy formulation that is driven kind of from the top down. And I also think that Jody's examples are pretty useful. I want to just refer back to a book, probably 1970 or something like that, which made an impression on me when I read it. And I've spent my life in public policy at the federal level. And what I'm saying is, I think really like Jody, it's in the kind of US context. The book was called Pills, Policy, and Profits. And it was really just a general description of how policy interacts with people, constituents, and with the motivation of corporations for profit. And it's a messy process. It's similar to what's described with the old sausage metaphor. You don't always, there's a lot of grinding of gears. Those are really three separate gears. And I think, as hinted at or even said explicitly by Jody, policy frequently needs to be somewhat reactive to an innovation. Sure, you can have innovation in government, which is where policy is kind of based. But real innovation is coming from individuals or corporations. And that innovation has an impact. And over time, that impact starts creating a sort of political feedback. And that's when the policy process begins to be kicked in and formulated. So it's about as variable as the number of innovations that human beings can come up with. And so apart from that, the kind of breadth of that broad description, and that description even varies a bit from country to country in different regulatory and policy frameworks. It's a great thing to think about and talk about, but it's a really hard thing to pin down.
Okay, thanks, Terry, for that. Marcus, go ahead.
Mary Ann, you had your hand up before. Did you take it down? And are you
I
on something
did.
different, or did you want to go back to what you were originally?
Yeah, I put
to
it down
jump
and then I
ahead
put
if
it back up.
You had your hand up before.
So many thoughts about this, and I'm trying. That's why I put my hand down and then back up. So I did some work with the National Park Service, so that's my experience at the federal level. So on one hand, on the federal level, I'm holding, I guess, that Regenesis definition of regenerative development, like the opportunity born of crisis for systems change. Because now at the federal level, there's so much in crisis at the moment. So the one question that really is coming up for me is, how do we potentially use that crisis to create a more functional system? When I was first working with the Park Service, a lot of my work is in regenerative story development, and they were trying to think differently about history, and so that the the guides at the park were more resourcing the visitor to think about the history of what had happened there from their own, within their own lineage or from their own perspective. So more of a what they were calling a guide on the side rather than like I'll tell you what happened here from like it's one person, mostly colonizer perspective, right? So I was really excited about that work, and then the Trump administration came in and out, basically said they would not fund anything that talked about systems or systems change. Now we're really even much more in the thick of that. So, one potential I see in that is I really have been building a belief that development should happen on more of a place sourced level, which is why I'm part of a bioregional movement. So I guess I see some potential in the crisis right now if the breakdown brings that, development of policy much closer to where people live, if that makes sense. Um, and then, the other thing that's coming to mind for me, Joya, is do you know the paradigms of development, those four the value, return, arrest, disorder, do good, regenerative? Yeah, so that's the other thing that's coming to mind for me is okay, so if we can actualize systems that are kind of placer to source for policy development, and then how do you change the process so you are really um, seeking, like finding what that place, what that community, what that city is really seeking to emerge first, rather than. I also worked in community solar development, and it was, I feel like really from a do good perspective, and it had a lot of, some other people have said here, unintended consequences for taking out, and it's still happening in New York and Massachusetts, like acres and acres of forest and farmland to put in solar, like big solar farms that are run by multinationals. So while electric rates are shooting upward, none of that money is coming back to the communities or community ownership. So again, I think to a certain extent, part of that was out of the best of like green intentions, but also part of it was like really completely co-opted by big corporations. Um, anyway, I guess that I threw out kind of like a bunch of different things there. I hope some
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. Yeah, no, thank you, Marianne. I've been thinking a few things, but I'll let maybe Marcus go, and then
It just
I'll talk about those. Yeah, go ahead.
the one thing that's coming up for me in this is we have a culture that has this huge tendency to focus on the binary, right? Something's good, something's bad, red, blue, right? There's this binary scenario, and I think I would offer a premise that useful public policy um, is not, and this is law of three, right? Useful public policy does not come out of what is considered to be the highest and best way of the binaries engaging one another, and that's compromise, where everybody loses, right? That's like the gold star of politics, right? Is oh, we were able to compromise and agree to, some minimal solution. And I'm going to suggest that in a culture focused on the binary, we are not going to get effective public policy until the third force of reconciling energy gets brought in. And as Gurdjieff tells us, right, our culture tends to be third force blind. And until we bring that a different kind of energy to the development of public policy, right? It's the energy field in it that needs to shift and change if you want the policy outcomes to shift and change. And so I might suggest that the greatest potential is to actually work on the energy field of how policy and that process comes together and gets developed. Otherwise, we're going to just keep doing the same thing over and over, which is we seem to be stuck in a rut. I'm primarily talking about the U.S., right, where we got this,
Yeah.
two-party system, and it's I don't have a sense of how it might be different in other parts of the world that aren't focused exclusively on a two-party system. But
Mm.
anyway.
Yeah, just quickly, if I can react before I get to you, Miguel. So thank you everybody for your inputs. And I'm just thinking about, okay, I'm going to go back to Mauritius, this little island, but okay, so what happens is that the government has a vision, has a very broad vision that is there for, 10 years because, they don't know how long they're going to be in power. So fine. So it goes for 10 years, but then in that development plan, national development plan, if so from that national development plan will come the other policies of those different sectors. I'm just thinking aloud, so from that development plan will come all those little, environment, whatever, fisheries, whatever other sectors, transport, etc. So what if that national development plan, which is the big umbrella for all these little policies, if that plan is developed in a way where there's a guideline to tell to to talk about this potential of, I don't know if that would work, but a framework that you have to use this framework if you want to make a policy. For example, if you want to have a policy in the sector, you got to use this thought process, this framework, all of the regenerative practice ideas. I wonder if that does that does that solve, not solve, but does that help? Because as you said, Terry, the policy, all of these creating policy is a very complex process. So if there was already something from the like a main menu that's saying, if you're going to do that, you have to do this. Let's say there's a regenerative section in the development policy plan that you need to follow for each sector. I don't know. I'm just wondering if that makes it a bit easier. Yeah, go ahead, Miguel.
Yeah, so I feel the voice of Carol saying, no, you can't cookie cutter the process in a way that it tries to give you an instruction on how to do policy. On the topics of the Mauritius specifically, and most recently Jamaica. So let's say you're doing policy at a local level, thinking, all right, we experience the threats of climate change at a local level. We're trying to protect the incursion of the forces of tourism descending on our little island, shifting culture, essence, and so forth. But you're acting at the local level, and the causes of those things are not local. So the pressure building weather in a way that is a destroyer of places, it's elsewhere. And in the same sense, the idea that millions of people need to get on airplanes and ships in order to take a picture and then share it online, that is an external pressure. So what I'm getting at is that going back to what I was saying on the symptoms, those things are local expressions of a problem that is at a higher order. So I think that what Marcos was saying is that we need to think of how what we do in policy has the capability of affecting change at a higher order, so that can then move away from the dyadic scenario and then bringing the higher order frameworks into play.
And I have another two quick stories. I think that we're right. We can't dictate process, but we can open the door to process. And I think one example is in New York City, where they created a local law to benchmark all of the buildings over 25,000 square feet, I think it was. And then 3 or 4 years later, once the benchmarking had been understood and people were comfortable with that information flow, they created a benchmark for required commissioning processes with setting goals. And then once that was understood and everyone had their freak out moments and everything, they then a couple of years later, and it's coming into play this year, it created Local Law 97 to start to fine people, corporations, if they did not actually meet their carbon reduction targets that they themselves created. So they opened the door to a process, and then they facilitated the process over a 10-year time frame. And it changed how the work was done and also how people saw those policies, right? They didn't see them as arbitrary. They saw them as engagement points for the most part. Another example is one of my biggest failures at DASNY. When I first started there, I created a policy where every project we touched had to go through a LEED rating process, which was an admirable policy, and that's what the entire industry was pushing for at the time. But I didn't actually get stakeholder engagement as to what tools made sense for what projects with the wide variety of projects. So about 5 years in, I finally had the opportunity to update that policy to say, to require a process for talking with the owner about the goals for their building, deciding what measurement tool would be effective for that project, and then moving forward to get a rating or a judgment on how far they got to their goals, their own personally set goals for the project. So I think that those two instances talk about opening the door for process without requiring a certain process, which I think is really key. And the other thing it pulls in for me is that I think we're talking like it it isn't done now and it could be done in this way, but I think it can't be done unless we take a step that might or might not get us there. I think the time factor has to be more strongly considered.
Yeah, Tony?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm going to pick up a little bit on what Marcus was saying. What's coming to me from that was, in a way, and maybe it's responding a bit to what Jody was saying about the timing of when policies are actually enacted. It seemed to me that this kind of idea about the field is really having a shared understanding about what it is that is really valued. And once that is established, then policies can arise out of that. And policies maybe have to adapt to respond to changing situations. But the overriding sort of values, and maybe again we can point to the four paradigms, about saying, they need to be from a regenerative basis. Always having those as the kind of North Star, as it were, for all policy making to refer back to. The trouble is, I guess, is that there are a lot of politics, and we're perhaps not quite as extreme or binary here in the UK, but not too far off sometimes. I mean, there's a third party now stirring things up. But the that those sort of conversations, if you like, around trying to establish what those values are important, seem to be lacking in the political arena and the public arena. And it's only once those can be sort of really established, I think, then policies are then perhaps more take on a political aspect themselves. How do you actually enact this thing? How do you really interpret this idea that actually climate change is critical and we need to address it? And also, I think this idea of subsidiarity is, and I think a few of you touched on that, is that the level at which those policies are made at appropriate level to have those sort of feedback loops from those who are actually affected directly by the policies. So here in this, I don't know in the States, but here in the UK, we have a whole raft of planning policies. We have a kind of national policy framework that sort of sets sort of vague objectives. And then at county level, we have local plans, which are renewed every 5 years or so, which then address all issues about land use and pay regard to the national policies, but are also tailored more to local stuff. And they, because of their very nature of timing, are apolitical in the sense that it doesn't relate to an electoral cycle.
Yeah, just a quick thought before I get to you, Josh. Yeah, thank you, Tony. I think the seems like every country has its own way of own process for policies. It's all very different. Now the thing is, when we're talking about regenerative practice, we are also talking about these. One of you brought it up, the Miguel, the connected systems. You know, the greater whole and the proximate whole, and how one decision in a policy can affect these other components that are connected to it. So I'm just wondering whether that is something to look at. Whether that would be that would be something to explore, whether these policies are actually connected to the other policies, and are they actually taking care of, do they know what would be the consequences, and then they are taking care of those consequences. So
Yeah, you have to think systemically in order to do that.
Mhm.
All right. So I think the answer is usually pretty much a no. But go ahead,
Josh,
Jeff.
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Going back to a previous question you raised, Joya, is there a framework that might, from a regenerative lens, that might be applying? And so I was challenged. I was happy to have that challenge. And what came up for me is the law of three. That if we had to apply the law of three to every action or public policy, as to what the greater effect is, which is where Miguel I think was going as well. And also, of course, the first line, what kind of education we would have to have within our communities, to affect the project, whether it's systems thinking or educational. So I thought maybe that may be applied. And then I was kind of wondering, have we ever seen this before? And what came up, especially since it's no longer done, I think, is the whole concept of an environmental impact statement that had to accompany projects. How are you going to be affecting the environment? I mean, even as simple as stormwater. What's adding all this impervious or changing the contours or any number or channeling streams or things of that sort. what's the environmental impact? And I think that may have been probably not called regenerative at the time, but that may be, a way of looking at the third line of work as to how we are affecting the overall community ecology, but what we're doing in our, plot of land. And so that may have an application that's been tried and maybe a way forward to add some regenerative, effect to public policy.
Yes, correct. Yes, those environmental impact assessments and the strategic environmental impact assessments. I remember those that were a little bit different, but yeah, similar idea, which is yeah.
Just want to real quick build on what Josh was saying about, framework for this. Law of three applies universally to almost anything. So that's always a great go-to. But the thing that's coming up for me, and I think someone else alluded to this, and I just want to lift it up, is the notion of having some level of baseline fundamental principles that the parties involved agree to. And that so you can develop those principles, right, as a way to initiate, right, agree. What is it it's inviting reconciling energy in. So what is it at a reconciling level? What's a principle that we can all agree to, right? And so I think one of the symptoms that we're seeing in this country, in the US, is we've been operating for a few hundred years based on a loose but relatively coherent set of agreed upon principles. And there seems to now be a bunch of different interpretations of those, and the level of agreement around them has been eroding. And I think it's that, right, we're not agreeing to this same set of principles anymore that's causing all the erosion of the political sphere in this country. So it's I think that's a foundation, is you need a set of agreed upon principles before you
I
even
like that.
try to bring in a
Yeah.
framework for it or anything.
Sure, sure. It's like a guideline, or like, yeah, the principles. What are your your guiding concepts, guiding, what is going to be,
Right.
because yeah. Okay.
I'd like to,
Marianne?
if you don't mind, just add something really quickly to what Marcus said. I think beliefs come even before
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, totally.
Well, then it's worldview, isn't it? Take a step back. What's your worldview? Danella Meadows, intervention points, isn't it? It's number 12 is the most important thing, is what is, how do you see the world? And if you see it as separate and divided, then you're going to get divided and separate policies.
Go ahead, Marianne.
Sorry, as everyone speaks, I keep shifting. What can I add to the conversation? I kind of am going back to your question, Joya, of like, it seemed to say like where there already is a vision and a national development plan, then it sounds like you're sort of acting like that's already there, right? So then how do you best work with that to implement? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking like what, because going to each individual policy it's not difficult. It's just that each one is customized. Each one has a different community. Each one has different interests, etc., etc. So what if just like even Marcus was saying, so if we have these principles or these beliefs right from the beginning for this entire plan for the state or for the nation, then can we do something with that?
Okay. So then what I'm thinking is you don't, right? It sounds like if you're already working with a vision and development, then then the principles are behind that. So then where I go to in the midst of like that, you don't, then the potential seems like it might be like a ground up way of then thinking about um, a way to engage that kind of principles and values from like a ground up perspective, right? So how do you build? So you're kind of working at the how do we implement what's already this national development vision, right? So, and whatever the values are behind that, which can be not great in my experience. Is there a way within a place that you can intervene systemically at the kind of ground level that works up towards those values and principles? Like, can you get like a coherence at a community level or at a city level or something that works backwards or more? I don't know how to, does that what a, because I totally agree that Danella Meadows says that that paradigm shift is the most effective way, but the hardest to actually get to, right? So is there a way to like work in the other direction at the implementation place, which might be some of the stuff that you were saying earlier, like really, a robust stakeholder engagement, a storying place, a sense of like really understanding what this place is seeking to emerge or what this community is seeking to emerge. So I guess I'm going to kind of, is there a way to do practices that build that sort of in at the local level? Is that helpful? Because
Yeah, no, I like that, and I think it's a good note to kind of end the discussion because I'm just thinking, Marianne, that uh, the process of policy is very complicated. Uh, regenerative. Also, we have a lot of frameworks and we have a lot of thinking to do and how to integrate. And I think when you mentioned about the community-led policy, I'm thinking of it like that, the community-led policy. Maybe that could just be that one component that for now we add to the policy process and not just say, okay, the stakeholders have to come together. No, no, no. It's more that it's communication, the engagement, and all of those things, listening, etc. So just having this component about the community um, being involved, but maybe expanding on that a bit more, using this regenerative kind of lens where we talk about the nested systems, we can talk about the potential of that place, etc. So maybe just that one thing can, if we add it to,
Well, also I would say to that end, always seeking essence, right? I mean, one of the reasons you can't just kind of say like this is the thing that always works is
Mm,
because that community or that place might have a very different process than some other community or place,
Right.
right? So,
true.
what are the practices that kind of really bring and enliven that community or that place? And how do, that's, I guess those are the questions coming up for me and trying to work from the ground up that still tries to reconcile with whatever that
Yeah, yeah.
those values and principles are that are in the National Development Plan.
Mm,
So we're about out of time here. So I have a question for you, Joya. So you came into this session with a question. So based on all you've heard, um, how would your question be different? Right? In other words, what has shifted in how you would frame a question around public policy? And if you have an answer, great. If not, you might want to sit with that one.
yeah. So what has shifted for me is that I think that what has shifted for me is looking at, I think it's looking at, I was looking at the national picture. I'm looking at it in a big way. Actually, no, I don't know yet because
It's fine to not know, right? But
yeah, I don't
I
know.
would encourage you to think about it in the formulation of a question.
Yes, yes.
Right. And one of the patterns I heard, and everybody was reacting to that. This is a really broad thing. Maybe we need to
Mm,
get more
mm,
specific and concrete.
mm.
So maybe that's an aspect of it. But yeah, what's and to the point of essence, right? What's the essence of what you want to know? What's the essence of the question that you're holding around this?
Well, I want to when I started this session, I said, remember that policy that was in Mauritius, and I used to go to the people in the community, and they said, "Oh, yes, we know that policy, and then, we contributed to it." So it's just that the community is aware, the community really understands it, the community owns it, and they want to do something about it. So that policy is actually um, not just something that's up there, but it's also integrated within the people. So I want that basically.
Yeah,
I want to know what can be done to encourage more of that. And I think Marianne and all of you, you talked about this, the essence and the community and the place. It has that obviously has a component to it. And why can't just one simple thing be put into this national development or whatever national development plan that states this, that says, this is what we're talking, the place, the essence, the people. Just one component, I think, of regenerative practice would make a big difference. Even that, yeah, even if it's so little, but it would make a big difference, I think.
all right. Well, thanks for bringing the subject today, Joya. Appreciate that. And thanks everybody for chiming in. We had a very active level of we had a queue going on almost the entire call of people chiming in on it. So I appreciate
Yeah.
everybody participating.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for being present today. And I appreciate your insights and your questions. And thank you so much.
Thank you as well.
Have a good
Thanks, Joy.
weekend,
Have a
everyone.
great
Thanks,
week.
Joy.
Yeah,
See everyone.
everyone.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.